Now, I'm going to bring in Tim Canova now because he knows a thing or two about voter suppression and election fraud. And Tim was, of course, running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida. And there was clear chicanery happening with the votes. In fact, in his first run against her, they destroyed the ballots, which was illegal. And so somebody was supposed to go to jail, except it's a one-party rule. So it didn't matter. They all covered for each other, and nobody went to jail, even though a judge ruled it was illegal to destroy the ballots. And here's Tim Canova with us right now, a victim of election fraud. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hi there, Jimmy. Doing very well, thanks. How are you?
Good. So I just want to show you this. According to the UN, exit poll discrepancies exceeding 4% signify election fraud. Well, here's what we've got so far. Look at the discrepancies.
Yep.
Some of them, most of them are double digits.
Yes.
Double-digit discrepancy. So, Tim, can you tell me, what is your opinion about what's happening in this primary to Bernie Sanders? How does Joe Biden, who was in last place, couldn't get 10 people to show up for a campaign event, isn't even campaigning, by the way, and Bernie Sanders getting huge crowds like normal, somehow Joe Biden is kicking his ass? Do you believe these results?
I don't believe any of the results. Joe Biden's miraculous surge makes no sense whatsoever. Not only did the results exceed the exit polls, they exceeded the pre-primary polls, many of which had him in third and fourth place in some of those Super Tuesday states. We're supposed to believe the narratives that are being spun, that it's all because of either voter suppression. Voter suppression is real, but it's not on the kind of scale that could possibly explain these exit polls, for instance. We're told the millennials didn't show up to vote, that the endorsements from Mayor Pete and some others were just unbelievable, endorsements that shifted millions of votes. I don't believe any of those explanations. Really, the only explanation that makes sense is that the electronic voting machines, the software, was rigged. Mm-hmm. We saw this happen to us in both 2016 and 2018. There's a reason they threw out the ballots from 2016, because they were afraid the ballots were going to show the reality, which is that the results were rigged. Both times, the experts said our official results were mathematically impossible. 2018 was really a watershed, because I went up and really put myself out there to expose the election rigging by electronic voting machines. I was writing to every senator, including Bernie Sanders, and every member of the House. They were on notice exactly what happened, and Bernie Sanders and the rest chose to ignore it, as if it wouldn't happen to Bernie Sanders in 2020. This is a sort of type of candidate malpractice that he didn't think it would happen to himself, and then when it happened, he's not willing to step up and expose it. Sanders' campaign raised $36 million last month. They have the resources to expose this, and they choose not to.
Why do you think they choose not to, Tim? Is it because just like Bernie Sanders in 2016, he's just going to bend the knee to the DNC like he did in 2016? He's not going to ever point out they're cheating in a real way for whatever reason?
For whatever reason, yes. Who knows what carrots or sticks exist to pressure Sanders. Whatever carrots and sticks existed in 2016 presumably still exist, and he's just not willing to call it out for what it is. And I think this is really, I called it campaign malpractice. Sanders styles himself as a democratic socialist. And if he cared half as much about democracy as about the socialist agenda, then this would be exposed. You're not going to have a Green New Deal. You're not going to have Medicare for all as long as you have rigged elections. It's that simple. Election integrity is not an important issue. It's the most important issue. And, he, and not just Sanders, but many of his followers taking his cue, have gone silent on this, and they've been silent about it for 4 years. And that's really what the crime is. Sanders would rather go along with the DNC narrative that about Russia and all that nonsense, the Mueller report, spend $30 million plus, instead of trying to convince Trump that we need to have paper ballots. And after all, Trump himself actually tweeted for paper ballots. So instead of making this not just the top priority, but really the one and only priority to fix our elections, to reform a broken system, we don't have a democracy. These election results, there's no reason to give them the presumption of legitimacy.
I'm with you. I'm completely skeptical of them. I know there were some prominent lefties in the media who dismissed the discrepancies of the exit polls early on in the primary, who have now talked to me privately saying, you know what, I think I was wrong about that. And I think there's something to those discrepancies now. So it's not just you. It's not just me. It's other prominent people who are coming around to this, even though Bernie Sanders will never mention this, because he just will not do it. If Tom Perez gives him an order, it just seems like he follows it.
It's very sad. I expect probably what you expect, that Sanders is not going to bow out of the race and endorse Tulsi Gabbard. He's going to bow out of the race and get behind Joe Biden. Or whoever has to pick up the pieces if Joe Biden can't make it over the finish line. And, his justification for that is going to be ad hominem attacks, simply vilification of Trump as a racist, a sexist, corrupt, you name it, fill in the blanks. And this should be beneath him. It should have been a campaign about issues. There are enough issues that Donald Trump could be vulnerable on, instead of just sort of this smear of Russia and racism. I'm just not surprised, though, that this has been a rigged campaign season. Nothing was done in 2016 or 2018, and it's just not a surprise that it would happen again now.
So what do you make of this? So here, Ocasio-Cortez says, I do not attribute the loss on voter suppression. Biden won the night fair and square. This is from the week before. Anywhere with a multi-hour wait to vote, whether it's in Georgia, Texas, Michigan, or anywhere else, is a problem. Voter suppression primary. So that's a contradictory tweet. Well, how could it be a problem if it didn't swing the election? So if it's not swinging the election, exactly, then it's not a fucking problem. And so she's trying to be what this is her bending the knee to the DNC. That's what that is.
It is, and Jimmy, voter suppression is a real problem.
Yes.
However, I also think it's a little bit of a distraction. As long as we're talking about suppression, like there weren't enough voting machines in Michigan or in North Dakota, this is election rigging on a retail scale, you could say. Rigging the electronics, the software, is rigging elections on a wholesale scale. It's being able to flip a vote, flip millions of votes with just a few keystrokes, a few lines of source code. Actually, is all it takes. And in my last election, there was a Republican poll that was reported just a week or two before our election day, and that poll had Wasserman Schultz and our campaign tied in a dead heat at 34% each.
I know.
If you could take someone who's in the 30s or higher and assign a 5%, that's what we supposedly got, and not just 5% for one group, but for every single demographic, which the expert said is mathematically impossible. That is rigging with such impunity. They tested it out on us. They realized if they could do it on that kind of a scale so blatantly, of course, no one's going to stop them from doing it in 2020 against Bernie Sanders. And the other thing I should mention is that the only way to really catch them is to demand to inspect the ballots. And when I asked to see the ballots after my 2016 race, I can't tell you how many of the political consultants and the folks in the progressive establishment warned me against doing it and told me I'd be washed up in politics and you can't do that. Nobody does that. That's the problem. Everybody's afraid to simply ask to see the ballots. Sanders hasn't asked to see any of the ballots in any of these contests.
Well, you make a great point. He really cares about socialism, and if he cared more about the democracy part, we'd all be better off. Anyway, Well, I appreciate you lending, your expertise. Now, why do you? I don't know. Do you know if Senator Sanders has called for paper ballots? Is anybody else calling for paper ballots? Besides
Tulsi Gabbard has a paper ballot bill. I have not heard anything from Sanders about it. And then Donald Trump has tweeted about it. And there's lots of ways to do it. In Columbia County, New York, which is a couple hours north of New York City, you've got Dr. Virginia Martin was the Democratic election commissioner. She had a Republican counterpart. And they were required to count all the votes by electronic machine under state law. But they went above and beyond that. So after the machine count, this bipartisan effort of, commissioners would have a paper ballot audit. They would count 100% of the paper ballots cast in public by hand, and it would take some time, but it was a real transparent audit to verify the vote. And by doing that, it deters anyone from rigging the election machines. They don't want to rig the election machines and then suddenly the paper ballots come out wildly different. So we should either get rid of the machines altogether, and as they've done in most European countries. Britain just had big elections. It was all paper ballots counted by hand in public. They had to wait until maybe midnight to get the election results, but they were fair, transparent, and verifiable election results. Americans are so used to turning on the TV, the polls close at 7 p.m., and we want final results by 8 or 9 p.m. because that's what the machines are going to feed us. And, we act as if we should trust these machines. There's no reason to trust them. There are three major vendors in this country. And the biggest one is ES&S, Election Systems and Software. If I ask you who owns election systems and software, if I ask anyone, they really don't know. And I've researched it enough to tell you it's owned by a private equity company called the McCarthy Group that's based in Omaha, Nebraska. There's not much more public information available on the McCarthy Group than that. That's who we're trusting the software to. This is black box voting. There are forces that we don't even know about, and I'm not even saying it has to be the insiders that are doing it. It could be outside hackers. It could be almost any intelligence agency in the United States or big corporations can hack in the election machines in Florida. If you have paper ballots, you think, okay, we're voting on a paper ballot, it's secure. Those paper ballots are scanned to be tabulated. And the scanning machines have wireless cellular modems on them. It's not a back door, it's a front door for hacking. It's a joke of a system that we have. We should be ridiculing it. It does not deserve any kind of respect.
And so, Tim, not only were you polling at 34% tied with Debbie Wasserman Schultz before the election, how did the votes actually turn out? Wasn't there a time, didn't you get like 5% in every ethnic category, which seems like an impossibility?
Exactly. We got 5% among whites, blacks, Hispanics, males, females, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And I'll tell you, leading experts in computational science at some of the nation's top universities analyzed those results. And you know what their conclusion was? Mathematically impossible. It would be like winning the lottery every day for a year.
And still nobody picked up the mantle of we covered it here on this show, but that didn't get anything in the front page of the New York Times or the Florida Sentinel or anything like that?
No, and this is the problem with the mainstream media. They would rather have talking heads speculate about why an election came out the way it did. I supposedly got such a low number because it was both a blue wave and a red wave. That's how they tried to explain it. It made no sense. And as far as, it's funny. They all like to talk that they're pro-science when it comes to climate change.
Yeah.
Well, how about the science of math, computational science?
That's right.
Suddenly, that's not important, I guess.
It's amazing, Tim. Anybody who looks at your case for even 5 seconds can see there was clear election fraud. They destroyed the ballots to try to cover it up. The judge said that was illegal and nobody got punished. Nobody got fined. Nobody went to jail. They committed election fraud. We all know it and nothing's happening. Why? Because it's one-party rule. Because the people who the people who donate to the Secretary of State, who's supposed to enforce the election law, or the governor, are the same people who donate to Debbie Wasserman Schultz's campaign. Say they want the same thing. They don't want you in power because you're actually going to hold power accountable. And so that's why the two parties reveal that they're one party. And even when there's obvious election fraud and malfeasance, nobody covers it. Nobody does anything about it, even though a judge said it happened, right?
That's 100% right, Jimmy. It's 100% right. The judge granted a summary judgment. This was Florida's 17th Judicial Circuit, a 10-page decision, which concluded that Brenda Snipes, then the supervisor of elections, had violated state and federal statutes with criminal liability. It was very clear. She admitted in videotape sworn deposition to destroying the ballots. It was very clear these were criminal violations. And yet we couldn't get a Republican administration in Tallahassee or the Justice Department when it was run by Jeff Sessions, which is another interesting story. We had the federal prosecutor here in South Florida. He was the interim U.S. attorney who was very interested. We were handing him an open and shut case on a silver platter. He spoke to my lawyer for a couple of hours. My lawyer was very enthused. It looked like a criminal investigation and a prosecution was coming. And then this acting U.S. attorney went up to Washington, D.C. for a week of meetings at the Justice Department. And the word is the fellow at the Justice Department who killed the prosecution was none other than the Deputy Attorney General at the time, Rod Rosenstein, same fellow who appointed Bob Mueller to investigate the president.
Okay. It's a big club. You ain't in it, Tim. Me neither.
Exactly.
So, Tim, thank you very much. And
anytime, Jimmy.
Just before we let you go, just let me get your comment real quick because I'm going to cover this next.
Yeah.
What do you make of Donald Trump out-lefting the Democrats again?
You know, I grew up in New York, and I remember Trump growing up, and he never struck me as a complete right-wing guy. There are a lot of ways you could say it. Some people would say he doesn't have principles. I don't even want to say that. I think he was a typical kind of New York liberal for quite a lot of years. Who then moved towards the right, maybe while the Democrats were moving in other directions. I don't know. But I've always thought that the Democrats should have tried to work with him. And I guess the argument was if they worked with him, they'd be normalizing him. There's a video clip of Bernie Sanders. If you Google Bernie Sanders working with Donald Trump, you'll see a CNN interview with Sanders that's only a few minutes long. From November 2016, right after Trump got elected. And Sanders said he was looking forward to working with Trump on points that they have in agreement, and he'll oppose Trump where they disagree. How many times has Bernie Sanders gone to the White House to work with Donald Trump to convince him of anything? Zero. You know, it doesn't surprise me that Trump might be flexible on certain things. Look, he was against the TPP. He kept that promise and got us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I've been a law professor for 20 years calling for a rebalancing of our trade agreements. He's been rebalancing our trade agreements with China, Mexico, Canada, Japan, and other countries. I've been writing against the Federal Reserve. He's been beating up on the Fed. I don't like his manner of speaking. Nobody does. But, you know, it's funny. Do you judge somebody by their words or their actions? You know, Donald Trump got a lot of grief. He was allegedly said that the coronavirus was a hoax. Well, he actually said the hype that the Democrats were making of it was a hoax. Now, those are words. Look at the Democrats by their actions. They held primaries yesterday. Is the coronavirus a hoax? Is it real? Is it not? Well, I mean, I know the Democrats are saying it's the end of the world, but their actions speak otherwise. I don't know what to believe from the Democrats anymore. So now you have Donald Trump, who seems to be moving towards what? Universal basic income of $1,000 a month. He's pushed the Federal Reserve to get interest rates down to near zero. He just came out with an executive order today with a moratorium on HUD foreclosures, the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
But but Tim, he's just piggybacking on what Barack Obama did in the big economic meltdown, right? Didn't Barack Obama did that? Protected people's mortgages and their houses and then gave them a UBI? Isn't that what oh no, he didn't do any of that shit.
He didn't do any of that.
Isn't that amazing? People were ready for it, Tim. People were fucking ready for it. They were ready for big changes that like are happening right now. People were ready for it then, and Barack Obama didn't do it. Guess who's doing it? Trump.
Trump, absolutely. And why didn't Obama do it? We saw, what did WikiLeaks reveal? That Obama had that memo from Citigroup. Citigroup picked his cabinet, basically. Tim Geithner in the cabinet and Lawrence Summers. It was a trickle-down approach to a crisis. They took care of Wall Street. They didn't take care of Main Street. And then they wonder why both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were the two most popular politicians running for president in 2016.
It's weird to see Donald Trump be more of a socialist than the Democrats.
And more of a peacenik, right?
Yep, you're correct.
I know he has a big military budget, but he certainly seems to be trying to get us out of Syria and Afghanistan.
So listen, all right, Tim, I
Is
really...
he self-quarantined?
Are you quarantining yourself, Tim?
I am. I got to say, it's not that tough here in South Florida. I'm near the ocean, near the beach. They have closed down the beach, but I'm able to bicycle and rollerblade and run. I'm working at home. It doesn't seem like a huge crisis, at least in my own little universe. But I worry about others, loved ones who are a bit older, like we all do.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Especially people who have to quarantine by themselves.
Well, I'm quarantined by myself with a couple of stray cats.
Yeah, okay.
Aw.
All right, Tim Canova, thank you very much for stopping by and educating us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?